Watches from Grand Seiko are either loved or hated by us watch collectors. They do have awesome dials and an attention to detail that is unmatched in their price range, but they always had problems with their case dimensions or bracelets. But with the release of this watch, the SLGH 003, Grand Seiko has made multiple changes that I and a lot of watch collectors have been begging Grand Seiko to do. Today, I'm going to show you 6 changes Grand Seiko made on this watch that makes it better than previous Grand Seikos, ranging from the all-new case dimensions and design, up to their new high-beat 9SA5 movement, and lastly, I will talk about the price development of this watch on the second-hand market, because this watch has gone from trading way under retail to far above it. The first thing that makes this watch better than almost every Grand Seiko before it is the dimension of it. Grand Seiko watches have always been thick, and it was one of the main reasons why a lot of watch collectors didn't want a Grand Seiko. A lot of their watches had a thickness of 50mm, and they were combined with a thin bracelet or leather strap that didn't match with their small case size, which created this unbalanced top-heavy look on the wrist. But the SLGH 003 eliminates all these problems because it has the perfect dimensions. The 40mm case is considered as the sweet spot of the case dimensions. It's not too small for big wrists, nor too big for slim wrists. Another thing that makes it fit almost everyone is the lug to lug size of 47mm. I personally consider everything between 46 to 48mm perfect for my 16.5cm wrist, and 47mm is just right in the middle. But the biggest advantage of this watch is the thickness of only 11.7mm. It's perfect, it slips under the cuff when you need it, and it has enough presence on the wrist if you want to show it off. But why hasn't Grand Seiko made this move earlier? I mean, a lot of competitors have watches with thin cases, so why did it take so long with this transition? The reason for this thinner case lies all on the backside of this watch, because this watch is the first steel Grand Seiko that featured their new caliber, the 9SA5. The 9SA5 is a big advancement in watch movements. First, it's a high beat movement. To understand what makes a high beat movement so special, we have to understand the frequency of the watch movement. The frequency of a watch movement can be expressed in hertz or in vibrations per hour. If you double the hertz figure, you get the number of ticks from the second hand on your watch per second. For example, a normal watch movement like the ETA2824 beats at a frequency of 4 hertz. This means the second hand moves 8 times a second, so you have this gliding motion of the second hand. If you multiply that with 3600, which is the number of seconds in an hour, you get the vibrations per hour, also known as VPH. So a ETA2824 with a frequency of 4 hertz has a VPH of 28,800. What makes the high beat movement special is the amount of VPH it has in comparison to normal movements, because this Grand Seiko vibrates at a frequency of 5 Hz, so 36,000 VPH, which is 7,200 more vibrations every hour in comparison to normal watch movements with 4 Hz. The downside with this technology was always the lower power reserve, because the movement requires more power to operate. That's why their typical high beat movements, for example the 9S85, has a power reserve of only 55 hours. But with this new caliber, Grand Seiko fixed this issue with a new technology developed called the dual impulse escapement. This new escapement has a higher energy efficiency, and it has twin barrels that stores up to 80 hours of power reserve. Another impressive thing about this movement is that it actually got slimmer by 15% in comparison to their previous high beat movement, the 9S85. It's now about 1mm thinner, even though it's a lot more powerful. This made the thinner case size possible. If you want to know more about this new movement technology, I'll link the article about the 9SA5 in the description below. So the movement is powerful. But that's not the only thing that makes this movement stand out, because the movement finishing is also on another level. Movements from Grand Seiko were always well finished for their price point, but they never really stood out from the competition. The majority of their movements are decorated quite beautifully, but under close inspection they lack the polish and the attention to detail if we compare it to other manufacturers like A. Lange & Söhne or Audemars Piguet. But this time Grand Seiko has really put a lot of effort into the finishing of the movement. The 9SA5 features all the typical design cues you find in other Grand Seiko movements, but this time they improved their finishing and added multiple matte and polished areas on the movement. This creates this texture that changes under different light circumstances. The sharply polished screws and bridges reflect the light with a brilliant sparkle, making it one of the most beautiful mechanical movements. It's still not on par with a Lange, but the gap is closing. I personally think that this movement has a better finish than the movement on my Royal Oak, and if we consider this watch's price point of 10,000 euros MSRP, it really offers a lot for the money. Another thing they changed is the Grand Seiko logo printing. It's still there, only visible under a specific viewing angle. That's something that I really appreciate because the printing on previous models did disturb the view of the movement, and not seeing this beauty in action would have been a bummer. So the movement of this watch is powerful and beautiful, but that's never been Grand Seiko's main selling point, because they always convinced us with the dials and the execution of it. So what's special about the dial on this Grand Seiko? If we just looked at the stock photo of this watch online, you might think that Grand Seiko has really dropped the ball this time, because it seemed really plain and one-dimensional, and that probably caused the disinterest in this model at the beginning. One of the main aspects that make Grand Seiko dials so gorgeous were the textures they featured on their dials. This watch didn't have any kind of texture, so I was kind of underwhelmed, but I was still interested in this movement and the new case, so I thought I could bear with this boring dial. But oh boy, I was wrong, because this dial is so gorgeous if you see it in the flesh. On the surface, it might look like just another watch with a blue colorway. Every other watch brand has such a watch in the repertoire nowadays, but this navy blue colorway of the SLGH 003 is different from every other watch. This blue is something special because it's Grand Seiko's company blue, and they really put a lot of effort into the creation of this blue colorway. The blue changes in depth, ranging from navy blue to black, and with the sunburst finish polished to a mirror-like quality, it creates depth within the dial without the help of a texture or engraving of it. Combined with the brilliantly polished and brushed hands and indices, this light play is so much better than the fully polished indices on previous Grand Seiko models. Another thing that I really like is the red second hand and the applied golden Grand Seiko logo on the dial. These two colors really match the dial, and it gives this dial a bit of warmth. The date window is also precisely cut and legible, but it's the only thing that I kinda dislike about this watch, because it disturbs the balance on the dial. I know that the date feature is something that tons of people would like on their watch, and I agree that it comes in handy for me as well. But in my opinion, watches that are not intended as a tool watch shouldn't disturb the symmetry with function, because this watch and a lot of other watches from Grand Seiko are an embodiment of art on the wrist, and this feature compromises the beauty on this watch. I think they should leave it out or put it somewhere else that won't disturb the balance on the dial. But that's just my opinion. What do you think about the placement of date windows in watches? Tell me in the comments below. So the dial is awesome. What about the case? The case of this watch features a lot of brushed and polished areas. The sides and top side near the sapphire crystal is brushed, while the majority of the lug and side bezel is polished. What's really interesting is the lug design. It looks fascinating, and its complicated look is really hard to achieve, especially since the polished parts are their signature Zeratsu mirror polish. Grand Seiko polishes their watches to a mirror-like quality, and achieving this takes a lot of time and experience. But the effect of the mirror polish is worth it, because the perfect reflection of light in every situation is the result of this polishing technique. Combined with the brushed parts of this case, it really gives this watch this refined sparkle that is not common in other Grand Seiko watches, because they tend to slap the Zeratsu finish on their case and they call it a day. While it might shine like a diamond, it's sometimes too much, but this time this finish is on point and it fits this watch so perfectly. If we talk about a Grand Seiko, we have to talk about its bracelet. And to be honest, this bracelet is not perfect, but it's a step into the right direction. First, the actual size is great, because the lug span of 22mm connects great with the size of the case. There's no disconnect between the case and the bracelet. It looks like it was really made for this watch and not just an afterthought. The bracelet design is also new for this watch. It's a 5-link design, but it looks like a 3-link design. It's brushed on the surface with polished bevels on the sides. It complements the case really well, and I like the look of it. Another aspect that I like is the golden GS logo on the clasp. This gives it a little hint of playfulness, and I really appreciate it. The clasp feels sturdier than older Grand Seiko clasps. The haptic of closing and opening it is better than previous Grand Seikos, but it still doesn't feature any kind of fine adjustments, which I would have liked, and it's still something that they have to work on. There's still an option to change the bracelet with the locked holes, so if you don't like the bracelet, you can change it with any strap you like. One of, if not the most important thing that you have to know about the value retention of Grand Seiko watches is if the model is a limited edition or not. Because oftentimes the price starts below retail, but it will slowly rise up each month. Take this watch for example. The SLGH 003 was released in late 2020 for 10,000 euros on the market. It got discounted by authorized dealers quite quickly because this Grand Seiko didn't get the hype they expected, and the asking price of it was just too much for a lot of people. When the successor, the SLGH 005, also known as the White Birch, got announced, everyone jumped onto the White Birch hype train, and with this attention of that model rising, this watch also benefited from its popularity. Since this watch is a limited edition of 1000 pieces commemorating the 60th anniversary of Grand Seiko, getting an increased demand of this limited supply caused the price of this watch to rise above its retail price. And that's why this watch is currently trading for around 12,000 euros, which is 2,000 euros above its retail price. And since I got this watch at a discount back then, I'm currently at a profit of around 50%, which is of course not on par with Steel Sports Rolex, but I don't plan on selling my watch, so it really doesn't matter to me. But as far as value retention goes, this Grand Seiko differs from its brothers because of these aforementioned points. A lot of other Grand Seikos tend to lose some of their value and they will never recover to the MSRP, and with the SLGH 003, you'll be sure that it will rise with time. So these were the 6 things that makes the SLGH 003 better than a lot of previous Grand Seikos. While it is still not the perfect Grand Seiko, and I don't think that there will ever be a perfect watch, I'm still impressed with the improvements that they made, and I'm stoked to see what they will do with this new movement. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate a like on this video and a subscription to my channel. Thanks for watching and see you in my next one. Bye bye!